The sky wept a mournful drizzle, mirroring the tears that streamed down Michael's face. He stood a few feet from the freshly turned earth, the raw scent of soil mingling with the cloying sweetness of lilies, a cruel juxtaposition of life and death. He was 22, and already the world felt unbearably heavy. His younger brother, David, barely 19, was now resting beneath that mound of dirt, a victim of a senseless motorcycle accident. The funeral was a blur of hushed voices, sympathetic glances, and the hollow drone of the pastor's eulogy. Michael barely registered any of it. His mind was a fractured kaleidoscope of memories, David teaching him to ride his bike, David's infectious laugh, David's dreams of becoming a musician. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of all that was lost. He felt numb, detached, as if watching a movie of his own life. He knew he should be comforting his parents, offering them support, but he was drowning in his own grief, unable to find the strength to reach out. His eyes kept drifting back to the polished mahogany casket, the final, tangible symbol of his loss. He longed to open it, to see David one last time, to tell him how much he loved him. Around him, the small cemetery was filled with mourners, friends, family, classmates, all united in their sorrow. The air was thick with unspoken grief, a palpable weight that pressed down on everyone present. Michael felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of sadness, the anchor of his brother gone, leaving him to navigate the treacherous waters of a life forever altered. He just wanted to disappear, to join David in the silent embrace of the earth. The first sob racked his body, silent but violent, a prelude to the storm of grief that threatened to consume him entirely. The sob caught in Michael's throat, a strangled sound swallowed by the quiet murmur of the crowd. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to regain control, when a sharp, insistent voice sliced through the atmosphere of mourning like a shard of glass. "Excuse me. Excuse me, young man." Michael reluctantly opened his eyes, his vision still blurred with tears. Standing a few feet away was a woman, her face a mask of pinched disapproval. She was impeccably dressed in a beige pantsuit, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, a stark contrast to the somber attire of the mourners. She radiated an air of self-importance, her posture rigid, her gaze demanding. "Yes." Michael managed, his voice hoarse. "This parking situation is completely unacceptable," she declared, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "This is a residential street, and you people are blocking access to the entire neighborhood." Michael stared at her, dumbfounded. We're at a funeral," he stammered, gesturing weakly towards the casket. The woman's expression didn't soften. "That's no excuse for illegal parking. There are designated parking areas, and you're all parked haphazardly along the curb. It's creating a hazard." She clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white. Michael felt a surge of anger, a flicker of defiance amidst the overwhelming grief. "People are here to pay their respects," he said, his voice rising slightly. "It's a difficult day." "I understand that," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity, "but rules are rules. I have to get to the grocery store, and I can barely get my car out of my driveway." She punctuated the sentence with an impatient tap of her foot. "Honestly, the lack of consideration is appalling. Some people." She turned her head and loudly scoffed. Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Look, ma'am," Michael said, trying to keep his voice level despite the anger simmering within him, "we understand it's an inconvenience, but it's only for a couple of hours. People will be leaving soon. Surely, you can understand." He trailed off, gesturing again towards the casket, hoping the visual reminder of the tragedy would elicit some modicum of compassion. But Karen remained unmoved. "Understand? I understand that you people are inconsiderate and think the rules don't apply to you. This is a gated community, and we have standards. Your situation doesn't give you the right to disregard them." She emphasized situation with a dismissive wave of her hand. Michael felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The woman's words were like a physical blow, each syllable a fresh wound on his already aching heart. He could feel the tears welling up again, threatening to spill over. He clenched his fists, fighting to maintain his composure. "We're not trying to cause trouble," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We just want to bury my brother in peace." He choked on the last word, the raw emotion finally breaking through his carefully constructed facade. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, desperately trying to regain control. Karen, however, seemed oblivious to his distress. "Well, you're certainly disturbing the peace," she retorted, her voice rising in pitch. "I've lived in this community for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's utter chaos." She puffed out her chest, looking around as if expecting support from the other mourners, but they all avoided her gaze, their faces etched with disapproval. "I've had enough. This is ridiculous." "That's it," Karen exclaimed, reaching into her oversized handbag. "I'm calling the police. This has gone on long enough." She pulled out her phone with a flourish, her thumb hovering over the screen. Michael's heart sank. He couldn't believe she was actually going to call the police over something so trivial, so utterly lacking in compassion. "Please, don't do that," he begged, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a funeral. Show some respect." Karen ignored him, her eyes narrowed as she dialed the number. "Yes, hello, I'd like to report a parking violation," she said into the phone, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "There's a large group of people blocking the street in front of the cemetery on Elmwood Drive. They're attending some sort of gathering, and they've parked illegally all over the place." She paused, listening to the dispatcher on the other end of the line. "Yes, it's a complete disregard for the community's rules. I suspect most of them don't even live here. Probably just outsiders coming in and causing trouble." She glanced pointedly at Michael, her eyes filled with disdain. "They're creating a safety hazard, and I demand that something be done about it immediately." Michael stood there, paralyzed with disbelief. He watched as Karen continued to speak into the phone, embellishing the situation and painting the mourners as a disruptive force. He felt a mixture of anger, frustration, and utter helplessness. He couldn't believe that someone could be so callous, so completely devoid of human decency, especially at a time like this. The indignity of it all was almost unbearable. He just wanted her to go away and let them grieve in peace. As Karen triumphantly ended her call, a black SUV pulled up to the curb a short distance away. The vehicle was nondescript, yet it possessed an air of quiet authority. A woman emerged, her face etched with a weariness that seemed to penetrate even her professional demeanor. It was Elizabeth Stone, the Attorney General of the state, and David's mother. Elizabeth had been delayed by an urgent meeting at the Capitol, a last-minute crisis that demanded her immediate attention. She had raced to the cemetery as quickly as possible, her heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and grief. She had missed the beginning of the service, a fact that weighed heavily on her. As she approached the gathering, she could immediately sense the tension in the air. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for her husband and Michael. Then, she saw them, Michael standing a few feet away from a woman who was gesticulating wildly, her face contorted with anger. The scene was jarring, a discordant note in the already somber atmosphere. Elizabeth frowned, her brow furrowed with concern. She couldn't hear what was being said, but the woman's aggressive body language and Michael's slumped posture told her everything she needed to know. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She quickened her pace, her mind racing to understand what was happening. As she drew closer, she began to make out snippets of the conversation: parking, rules, disrespect. A cold dread washed over her. Could this woman really be harassing her son during his brother's funeral? The thought was almost too outrageous to believe. She pushed her way through the crowd, her resolve hardening with each step. "Excuse me," Elizabeth said, her voice firm but controlled, stepping between Karen and Michael. The years of courtroom experience were evident in her demeanor, a subtle shift in presence that commanded attention. "I couldn't help but overhear. Is there a problem here?" Karen, momentarily taken aback by Elizabeth's sudden appearance, paused. Yes, there is a problem. This young man and his associates are illegally parked and disrupting the entire neighborhood. Elizabeth turned to Michael, her eyes filled with concern. Michael, are you all right? He nodded weakly, unable to meet her gaze. Mom, she called the police because of the parking. Elizabeth's expression hardened. She turned back to Karen, her voice now laced with steel. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but this is my son's brother's funeral. People are here to pay their respects. I assure you, they will be leaving shortly. Perhaps a little understanding is in order. Just then, a police car pulled up to the curb, its flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the somber scene. 2 officers emerged, their expressions cautious. Karen beamed, a smug look spreading across her face. Officer, this woman is trying to excuse their illegal behavior. I demand that you issue citations and have these vehicles towed. Elizabeth sighed inwardly. This was escalating quickly. She turned to the officers, her voice calm and authoritative. Officers, I am Elizabeth Stone, the Attorney General of this state. This is a funeral procession for my son. I understand there may be some parking irregularities, but I assure you, everything is under control. We will ensure that the vehicles are moved as soon as possible. She reached into her purse, pulling out her official identification and presenting it to the officers. Karen scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. Attorney General? Don't be ridiculous. You expect us to believe that? I've lived in this community for 15 years, and I would know if the Attorney General lived here. This is just a pathetic attempt to get out of a ticket. She turned to the officers, her voice dripping with indignation. Officers, are you going to let her get away with this? She's impersonating a public official. I demand that you arrest her. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young officer with a nervous demeanor, hesitantly reached for his radio. Dispatch, can you verify the identity of Elizabeth Stone? Possible impersonation of a public official. Elizabeth remained calm, her expression unwavering. She had dealt with skepticism and disbelief before. It came with the territory. She simply waited patiently for the dispatcher to confirm her identity. Karen, however, continued her tirade. This is outrageous. I can't believe you're even entertaining this nonsense. Just look at her. Does she look like the Attorney General to you? She's probably some con artist trying to take advantage of the situation. I want those cars towed, and I want her arrested. This is my neighborhood, and I won't stand for this kind of behavior. She tapped her foot impatiently, her eyes darting between Elizabeth and the officers, a mixture of disbelief and righteous anger contorting her features. The drizzle continued to fall, adding a layer of surreal absurdity to the already bizarre scene. The young officer listened intently to the response crackling through his radio. His eyes widened slightly as he absorbed the information. He cleared his throat and turned to Elizabeth, his demeanor noticeably shifting. The initial skepticism had vanished, replaced by a mixture of respect and slight embarrassment. Ma'am, he said, his voice more formal now, dispatch has confirmed your identity. You are indeed Elizabeth Stone, the Attorney General. He offered a polite, if somewhat awkward, nod. His partner, a more seasoned officer, stepped forward, extending his hand. Attorney General Stone, I apologize for the inconvenience. We were simply responding to a call. He gave Karen a sidelong glance, a subtle hint of disapproval in his eyes. The atmosphere changed palpably. The officers, now aware of Elizabeth's position, were clearly eager to de-escalate the situation and avoid any further complications. Their focus shifted from issuing citations to finding a peaceful resolution. Ma'am, the seasoned officer said to Karen, his tone firm but respectful, I understand your concerns about the parking situation. However, given the circumstances, and considering the Attorney General's assurance that the vehicles will be moved shortly, perhaps we can exercise some discretion in this matter. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. I'm sure we can all agree that this is a difficult time for everyone involved. Karen, however, remained unconvinced, her face a mask of stubborn disbelief. Elizabeth turned her attention back to Karen, her voice calm and measured, yet carrying the weight of her office. Ma'am, while I appreciate your concern for maintaining order in your community, I believe you are mistaken about the legality of the parking situation. Funeral processions are often granted certain allowances under state law, particularly when they are brief and conducted with respect. Furthermore, she continued, her gaze unwavering, your actions have caused significant emotional distress to my grieving son and to the other mourners present. Is enforcing a parking ordinance truly worth disrupting a funeral and compounding their sorrow? She paused, allowing her words to resonate. As Attorney General, I am responsible for upholding the law, but I also believe in exercising compassion and understanding, especially in times of profound grief. I urge you to reconsider your demands and allow us to mourn my son in peace. Elizabeth's words, spoken with quiet authority and laced with barely concealed emotion, hung in the air. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes fixed on Karen, waiting for her response. Michael, who had been standing silently throughout the exchange, finally looked up at his mother, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. The weight on his shoulders seemed to lessen slightly, knowing that she was there, fighting for him, even in her own grief. The weight of Elizabeth's words, combined with the officer's subtle disapproval, seemed to finally penetrate Karen's stubborn facade. A flicker of unease crossed her face, and she shifted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence wavering. Well, she stammered, her voice losing its earlier stridency, I didn't realize. I mean, I'm so sorry for your loss. The apology felt forced, hollow, as if she were simply reciting lines from a script. She turned to Michael, offering a weak smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I truly am sorry. I just get so upset about the parking situation in this neighborhood. It's a constant problem, and I tend to overreact sometimes. She attempted a nervous laugh, but it fell flat in the somber atmosphere. Then, turning back to Elizabeth, she continued, and I certainly didn't mean to question your identity. It's just, you don't see the Attorney General at a funeral every day, you know. She trailed off, her voice barely audible. Elizabeth observed her carefully, her expression unreadable. She could see the wheels turning in Karen's mind, the desperate attempt to salvage the situation and avoid any potential repercussions. But the insincerity was palpable, a thin veneer of remorse masking her underlying entitlement and lack of empathy. The damage, Elizabeth knew, had already been done. The hollow apology could not erase the pain and disruption Karen had caused during this most difficult of days. Elizabeth took a deep breath, composing herself. She glanced at Michael, his face still etched with grief, and made a decision. Officers, she said, addressing the police, I will not be pressing any charges at this time. While I find Ms. S. behavior deeply disturbing and insensitive, I believe that pursuing legal action would only prolong this already painful experience for my family. She turned back to Karen, her voice firm and resolute. However, she continued, I want to be absolutely clear. Your actions today were unacceptable. You have caused significant emotional distress to a grieving family, and your lack of empathy is frankly appalling. I sincerely hope that you will reflect on your behavior and learn to treat others with more kindness and respect, especially during their times of greatest need. Elizabeth paused, her gaze piercing. I will be notifying the Homeowners Association about this incident. I trust that they will take appropriate action to address your conduct. She allowed a moment for her words to sink in, then turned to the officers. Thank you for your assistance. If you'll excuse us, we need to get back to the funeral. With a final, withering glance at Karen, Elizabeth placed a comforting hand on Michael's shoulder and gently guided him back towards the gathering of mourners, leaving Karen standing alone in the drizzling rain, the full weight of her actions finally bearing down on her. The call to the Homeowners Association was brief and to the point. Elizabeth outlined the events of the afternoon, emphasizing Karen's egregious behavior and lack of compassion. The HOA president, mortified by the report, assured Elizabeth that the matter would be addressed swiftly and decisively. Within days, Karen received a formal letter from the HOA, outlining the complaints against her and summoning her to a hearing to discuss potential sanctions. The possible consequences ranged from a formal reprimand to a temporary suspension of her privileges within the community, including access to the pool, clubhouse, and other amenities. The thought of facing her neighbors, knowing that they were aware of her actions, filled her with dread. The incident rippled through the community, sparking heated discussions and dividing residents. Some sided with Karen, arguing that rules were rules and that she was simply trying to maintain order. But many others were appalled by her lack of empathy and her decision to call the police on a grieving family. The story spread quickly through social media, earning Karen the unwanted label of HOA Karen and subjecting her to a barrage of online criticism and ridicule. For Michael and his family, the incident added another layer of pain to their already profound grief. While they appreciated Elizabeth's intervention, the memory of Karen's callous behavior lingered, a constant reminder of the lack of compassion in the world. The funeral, a sacred moment of mourning, had been tainted by a petty dispute and a shocking display of insensitivity. The experience left Michael feeling disillusioned and cynical, questioning the values of the community he had grown up in. The scar of that day would likely remain with him for a long time to come. In the quiet solitude of her office that evening, Elizabeth Stone sat staring out at the city lights, the weight of the day pressing down on her. The grief for David was a constant ache, a dull throb that never truly subsided. But intertwined with that personal sorrow was a profound sense of disappointment and concern for the state of society. She had spent her career upholding the law, fighting for justice and equality. Yet, standing there in the cemetery, confronted by Karen's blatant disregard for human decency, she felt a deep sense of unease. How had we, as a society, become so consumed by rules and regulations that we had forgotten the importance of basic human kindness? How could someone prioritize a parking space over the pain of a grieving family? The incident forced her to confront the challenges of balancing her personal grief with her professional responsibilities. As a mother, her instinct was to protect her son, to lash out at anyone who dared to cause him harm. But as Attorney General, she had a duty to uphold the law and to exercise restraint, even in the face of profound personal pain. Ultimately, she had chosen compassion over retribution, hoping that Karen would learn a valuable lesson from the experience. But Elizabeth knew that true change required more than just individual reflection. It required a collective commitment to empathy, to understanding, and to treating each other with dignity and respect, especially during times of hardship. As she looked out at the city, she vowed to use her position to promote those values, to foster a society where compassion triumphed over indifference, and where no one would ever have to endure the pain of being harassed during their darkest hour. The memory of David would fuel her resolve, a constant reminder of the importance of kindness and the enduring power of love.